Hey everybody, welcome back to Talking Stuff, the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast. I am Jeremy Birmingham. This is Spencer Holbrook. We are in the Lettermen Lounge at Roosters on Olentangy River Road as we, break down Ohio State football recruiting because we had so much fun doing this in person last week that I felt like we should do it again. And because this week we know we're going to do a second show when we're at Big Ten Media Day on Thursday. And hell, Spencer, why not just spend more time together as opposed to doing it, via the Zoom?
2 in-person shows, both brought to you by Buyers Auto. If you're looking
right.
for a new or used car in Central Ohio, go to Buyers Auto because we're at Roosters, but this show is sponsored by Buyers Auto.
It sure is.
It's great, though. We're going to have 2 in-person shows. How about it?
Yeah, I mean, again, folks, we're trying to make sure we stay up to date and current on everything happening around the world of Ohio State recruiting, but the Buckeyes are They kind of took a week off, it seems like, on the recruiting trail, while everyone else around the country had a huge couple days as players in the 22 class, 23 class made their decisions. It really started, as far as the Ohio State perspective, on Friday night when Tyler Booker made his commitment to Alabama. Booker, Spencer, we talked about the offensive line a lot last week, and I don't want to harp on it too much because it's just one of these positions where there are so many options and so many possibilities for Ohio State that it's kind of hard to look at one loss and be like, oh, well, darn it, there's another, big-time loss. But Booker is one of those guys that I think that they never really were in the mix for, despite the fact that he took his official visit. And I think that basically, like February or so, it kind of turned, and it was all going to be SEC for him. Alabama was not the favorite going into this. I mean, most people thought he was going to end up at Florida or Georgia, but Alabama with Evan Neal, with J.C. Latham, now they've got the sort of pipeline of the offensive lineman from the IMG Academy going to Alabama, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I want to chalk that up as another huge loss for Greg Studrara when it comes to going after the guys that are really top of the board type talents, but it certainly seems like at this point, maybe it's not worth going after a lot of the offensive linemen from IMG.
Yeah, and the other thing, I was honest last week.
Yep.
Be honest again this week. Alabama's going to win these recruiting battles against Ohio State right now. Alabama has put offensive tackle after offensive tackle in the NFL. Ohio State has put obviously plenty of offensive linemen in the NFL, but not at the first round, the second round level that Alabama has. And
yeah,
so
especially not a tackle,
when
which
you have
is what
that,
Tyler Booker wants to play.
When you have that trump card in your back pocket and you're Alabama and you already have the advantage of proven IMG to Alabama's success, it's not going to be easy for Ohio State to recruit against Alabama when it comes to offensive line. And I think that's one place where after this year, Ohio State can start to make some inroads is,
well, the narrative changes for sure. If Thayer Munford and Nick Petit-Frere go off and get picked in the first round or early second round, and then you have Paris Johnson in the same position next year, most likely. But you're absolutely right. I mean, what Bama is selling these kids is that, sure, Ohio State will get you into the NFL, but our offensive linemen are making $50 million because they're all first-round picks. That is absolutely the sell. And then, of course, it continues to be this belief that a lot of these kids just simply think that if they want to get the best football, it's going to be in the SEC. And that's, as the rest of the Big Ten struggles to catch up with Ohio State, but yet you see in the SEC the schools like Texas A&M, Florida, back on the come up. Georgia obviously is a national power. LSU. I mean, it's hard to look at that from a Big Ten perspective and say that it's wrong. I mean, right now, sure, there's I say that, but if you look at the national recruiting rankings right now, the top 3 schools are Ohio State, Penn State, and Notre Dame in the class of 2022.
Yeah, but that's not going to stay that way.
Right. I mean, we see Alabama only has like 6 commitments. I mean, they Clemson had a huge weekend picking up a couple 5-star defensive backs, Keon Sabb, one of them, Dalen Everett the second. It's just one of these things where these other schools that have built these big powerhouse programs are going to continue to just that slow burn all the way till signing day, and that's sort of their MO. They like to make the big splash in December and February. But back to the original point, I don't know that you can argue that if that's really the goal, to go and play in the NFL and play in the best football conference in America, it probably is the SEC.
Absolutely.
And for a lot of these kids who play their high school football down there, it's almost, you look at the Big Ten and go, okay, well, there's Ohio State, And where's everyone else? Even in the ACC right now, you see what Miami is on the rise. North Carolina is on the rise. There's a couple programs that you start to see some momentum.
Virginia Tech just got a couple commitments and is now in the pushing toward the top 10 in recruiting. They're not going to be good in the next couple of years, but all the momentum seems to be going elsewhere right now, and I think that's something Ohio State fans are going to have to live with because Ohio State already has so many guys in the class already, and because Ohio State stockpiled the class early, and now they're really zeroing in on just a few guys, whereas these SEC schools and some of the ACC schools have kind of, like you said, a slow burn to the finish line, and that class doesn't go from 8 to 14 in 2 months. It goes from 8 to 20 in 8 months.
Yeah, and it's what we talked about the offensive line, and the class prediction I did 2 weeks ago on LettermenRow.com was that I thought Ohio State was going to take 4 offensive linemen. The 4 that I had predicted were Tegra Shabola, George Fitzpatrick, Cam Dewberry, and Ernest Green. I still think that's reasonable and realistic. And Cam Dewberry and Ernest Green, if they end up in the class, are big-time wins for Ohio State and Greg Studrar to go to Texas and to go to California and get arguably the best remaining offensive linemen in those states matters. And that's certainly something that should be celebrated. But I know that there's this underlying belief among people that Greg Studrar is continuing to struggle on the recruiting trail. And I don't know if that's entirely something I buy, but I certainly think that it's a clear argument that people can make when you look at the way that Alabama specifically has been able to pretty much take whoever they want in those conversations in the last few years.
But I guess I push back on that a little bit because it's not like an Alabama offensive line coach is out recruiting.
Right, it's Alabama.
It's just Alabama.
Yeah.
And so where Ohio State's had this continuity and this development and proven success, just not in the first and second rounds with Greg Studrawa, who's doing a fantastic job when the players get on campus, Alabama is just Alabama. Yeah. And so these guys want to play there because they want to play for Alabama, not because they want to play for a certain offensive line coach. So is it Greg Studrawa struggling on the recruiting trail, or is it the power of Alabama or the draw of staying in the SEC?
Every player that has stayed for 4 years since Nick Saban took over at Alabama has won a national championship. So it's pretty hard to sit there and go, well, you shouldn't want to, you can't believe what they say, because it's pretty clear that they're selling this idea that A, you're going to be a first round pick, and B, you're going to win a national championship, because it seems to be happening pretty regularly.
And this isn't, an Alabama praise hour. That's not what we're trying to do. It's just when you look at the way they're recruiting on the offensive line right now, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's an uphill climb this is a rare thing for Ohio State too. It's an uphill climb to be Ohio State on the offensive line when you're recruiting. Just because the other schools that they're recruiting against, the top of the line schools, with the exception of Clemson, because Clemson doesn't put offensive linemen in the NFL ever. With the exception of Clemson, the other schools that you're recruiting against are putting guys in the first and second round of the NFL, even Georgia, Florida. So it is tough for Ohio State right now on the offensive line recruiting trail.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's because it's just there's a difference in development as far as not necessarily what type of development you get at Ohio State versus Alabama, but where these players are in their development when they get to Ohio State versus where they are when they get to Alabama. And does that make any sense?
Yeah, like you see how good Thayer Munford is. He's
right.
The top, one of the top, I'd say Evan Neal and him, the top 2 returning tackles
right.
in the country. Thayer Munford is a 5th-year player.
Right.
Evan Neal is a 3rd-year player. Right. And so when you start with a baseline of talent of a 5-star talent versus a 3.5 to 4-star talent, the output is going to be greater, faster.
Right.
And then you get to the NFL after 3 years rather than getting that first-round pick after 5 years.
Right. Evan Neal is as good a player now as he was when he came to Alabama. And I guess that's what I'm trying to say. I don't think that I think that they're recruiting from an area where the kids are much more physically developed, and whether that is because they're at IMG and you have the year-round football, whether that you're just anywhere in the South that has year-round ability to play football 7-on-7, all the other stuff that the Midwest doesn't have, there is a geographical and demographic challenge for Ohio State in recruiting these kids, because in the Midwest, these kids are quite honestly like a year behind when it comes to their physical development. And that's not even taking into consideration the fact that there's a lot of these kids that are going to Alabama that are going in as 19-year-olds as opposed to 18-year-olds. Like, there's a lot of reclassifications. There's kids being held back for football purposes. I mean, whatever. If that parents want to do that, more power to them. I mean, it's their decision. They have their whole life to figure out how to get them there. So I just think it leads to some interesting conversation when it talks about how do you get those guys to say, I'm going to come to Ohio State instead. It's kind of crazy to even suggest it, because there is, I think, in most objective people's minds, a clear-cut line between Alabama and Ohio State and everyone else. But it's like, is there also a clear-cut line between Alabama and Ohio State? And I don't think that there is in every position, but I think that there clearly is when it comes to the willingness of offensive linemen to wait their turn and to be willing to come and get developed. Because what you said is apropos. Like, if Thayer Munford's there for 5 years, and a lot of these kids at Ohio State are there 4 or 5 years, as opposed to 3 years, that turnover cycle is way faster. So you see just the increase of, okay, for every one guy Ohio State has, Alabama's having 2 of them. And so, like, that turnover changes, and I think that it does lead to some interesting conversation about, is there a better approach, or is there a way that Ohio State has to change the way that they're recruiting on the offensive line? Because even if you look at a guy like George Fitzpatrick, who's a really good player, really athletic, right? 6'6", 285, like former lacrosse player, dude can move.
He's not coming in right away and playing.
He's not coming in to play at Ohio State next year, and that's you have those very, very few guys. Donovan Jackson, I think, is a kid who can play at Ohio State this year. What does he? Does he? I don't know. And that's the thing. They do have pretty good guys returning. So it's like, is that long-term arc for development being somewhat used as a negative?
Well, and the last thing I'll say about this, because we've gone on offensive line recruiting for a while now. When you have Ohio State, I'll start over. When Paris Johnson was recruited to Ohio State, he was a generational, once every 2 decade Ohio prospect.
Right.
Tyler Booker is a once every cycle prospect in the South.
Yeah.
Paris Johnson is a once every decade or two in the state of Ohio. That is a disadvantage, no matter who the offensive line coach is, no matter who the head coach is, no matter if Ohio State's the #1 program in the country and Alabama's the 90th program in the country. The fact that there are 3 Tyler Bookers in every single recruiting class and there's 1 Paris Johnson once every 10 recruiting classes is a disadvantage. And you don't like to make excuses, because Ohio State doesn't. I think
there's a big difference between excuses and explanations.
Yeah, right? Ohio State needs to be. In all honesty, I think they need to be better on the offensive line recruiting. Just being able to stay in these battles and push them further into the season for offensive linemen. But at the same time, it is an explanation, not an excuse. Paris Johnsons don't grow on trees in Ohio. It seems like the Tyler Bookers grow on trees.
Well, and again, demographics have changed a lot, and so we've talked in the past on this show about how the recruiting battles in Ohio, like the northeast part of Ohio, has stopped producing football players pretty much, at least Ohio State level football players. There's a number of them now that are growing up in southwest Ohio and the Cincinnati area, but there's nothing in northwest Ohio. There's nothing in northeast Ohio, maybe a guy every year or two. Columbus has had a pretty good run in the last, but even in the state of Ohio, you see that the movement is south and west, right? Like that's where the people are going in the U.S. And it's starting. And so the Buckeyes have obviously done a great job turning their brand into more of a national brand, but that battle is going to continue to get harder and harder. So I think when you look at something like name, image, and likeness and a way that can be used for Ohio State because of the power of just the biggest brand in sports, especially the only brand really in Ohio that people, care that much about. I know there's a lot of Browns fans that care a lot about the Browns, but the Buckeyes are sort of all-encompassing in Ohio. I think that's where you will see them start to really take some advantage of that over the next few years, and I think you will see the Buckeyes win more of those national battles for the very few kids that are willing and interested to leave the South, because it's not a lot of. They're not all willing to, and that's the other part. I mean, not that Tyler Booker's. He's not originally from the South. He's from Connecticut, but he's been down at IMG for 3 years, and it shapes the way that they see college football.
Absolutely, and then like you said, some players are willing to leave the South. You look at a guy like Kayan Lee from Cedar Grove, Georgia. You look at AJ Harris, who's considering Ohio State. There are guys willing to leave. You just have to find them, build those relationships, and then.
But what's the difference there? You're talking about 2 defensive backs.
2 defensive backs in Ohio State is.
The proof is in the pudding.
Best in America. Yeah, right. Exactly.
And so that's first round picks being put out year after year by Ohio State. And so where the offensive line, it's not. And so as we said at the top of this, maybe you get an opportunity to start to change that narrative a little bit, as long as Thayer Munford and Nick Petit-Frere and Paris Johnson end up doing what they need to do. And it's not to say that Ohio State hasn't had first-round picks. Billy Price was a first-round pick. Pat Elflein was a first-round pick. These guys are interior linemen. Taylor Decker, there's been success. It's not like Ohio State isn't producing great offensive linemen, but it has been interior guys, and it has been guys that need to wait their turn, and that's something that's different, because I think that, like I said, that development track of 5 years versus 3, it really extends the moment from when you get out of high school to when you get to the NFL. If you're adding that extra 40% length of time, I mean, it does change what people are wanting out of college. But anyway, I don't know, man. That's just, I think that when you're recruiting against Alabama is one thing, right? Like, it's Alabama. You know exactly what you're getting. Every year, Alabama is going to be competing for the national championship, and Ohio State is on that level in most people's minds. And then you have that next tier, which includes, the Georgias, the LSUs, the Oklahomas, who had the Clemsons. Clemson is, I think, sort of in that weird, like, purgatory between second tier and top tier with Ohio State.
They made all their hay in the second tier, and now it's hard being at the top.
Right.
So they're struggling to stay there, but I think they are pushing.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're you see it though. I mean, they do things pretty well. Obviously, they land a bunch of 5-stars. They've got 3 5-star kids from IMG now committed to them. So I mean, it's a different mentality, and I actually think that, I mean, totally apropos of nothing and just off the beaten path here, I think that it will be interesting to see how Clemson's coaching staff deals with those players who are not developmental players and who are expected to come in and be ready, and versus what Clemson had done to get to where they are, which is building players from ground up and developing. So whatever, that's nothing. But Oklahoma is right in that next level, right? And they've been trying to get over the hump. And they had a huge weekend, picking up borderline 5-star Trayon Webb from Jacksonville Trinity Christian, and then Malachi Nelson, the 5-star quarterback in the class of 2023 on Sunday. We've talked in the past about how they do their quarterback recruiting, which is year on, year off, essentially. They're not going after one in the 22 class because they just signed Caleb Williams for the 21 class. He was the number 1 ranked quarterback in that class. Now you don't sign one in 2022. You go out and you get a transfer. They got the kid from Penn State who's going to be on the roster this year as basically the stopgap / emergency quarterback behind Rattler and Caleb Williams. Spencer Rattler, 2019 class, 5-star, then you take the year off. And then, so it's just funny to see how the difference of approach is. But clearly what Oklahoma's doing is working. Lincoln Riley is obviously great young coach, very energetic. They have a really top-notch social media, approach, a very customized, very personalized. And you think about the Trayon Webb thing, and Buckeyes were never in the mix for Malachi Nelson, and they're on his top 7 list or whatever that he put out last week, but
there was no chance.
There was no chance. Everyone knew he was going to Oklahoma for the last month and a half or so. But Trey Webb, I mean, it's interesting because Ohio State was the leader for him a month ago. He left Ohio State after visiting on the weekend of June 8th. And said, hey, Ohio State's top of my list. There's a relationship that he's had long held with Tony Alford, who's known him since he was like in 6th grade. There's all this talk about, he's like a father to me, blah. And then he commits to Oklahoma after one visit.
Hey, you see those Ferraris on the field, man. It's tough.
But this is a matter of philosophy, right? I mean, this is a matter of approach. So one of the things I've read, and I apologize, I don't remember where I read it, was that Trey Webb was telling a reporter that he didn't feel like he was a priority for Ohio State. And I don't know how that's even possible to know that at this point, to be honest. I mean, as a 2023 prospect, schools are not allowed to call you. So if a school is calling you regularly and making you a priority, they're doing it illegally. Against the rules. Not illegal. It's, against the NCAA rules.
That's illegal.
I know, but I don't like the term illegal because I think illegal is like hitting people with your car and driving away,
Oh, okay.
That's not like illegal. This is just a silly, arbitrary NCAA rule, right?
Yeah.
But so how do you make a kid a priority? I guess there's ways to make sure that they know where they stand. But for a kid like Trey Webb, who was being recruited by some schools as a defensive back, some schools as a running back, who's not able to be contacted, as much as they want. He made a visit to both schools. I don't even understand really like the concept of priority in that class. I mean, yeah, we have a guy like Sonny Styles who's down the street, and he's a priority for Ohio State just from a perception standpoint because you have to get him. Is there any player in the class of 2023 outside of Sonny Styles who is irreplaceable for Ohio State at this point? No. Even someone like Richard Young, who's the number 1 ranked running back in the country,
that though, I think, and I haven't talked to Trey Webb, I haven't talked to Richard Young, but I will say this: we watched the one-on-one workouts. The way, and I don't want to put words in Ohio State's mouth, the way Ohio State worked out Richard Young and the day with Trey Webb felt different. It's not like they were different. They were the same workout. Tony Alford was allowed to work each of them out at camp. The way that they worked out felt different.
But is that because the media was gathered differently?
I don't know. See, and that could be. But if you would ask me who's priority number 1 for Ohio State at running back, just on what I saw there, Richard Young is number 1, Trey Webb is number 2. Does he know that without Ohio State telling him that?
These kids are friends. I mean, they've talked about going to school together. And in fact, I mean, Trey Webb is now actively attempting to recruit Richard Young to Oklahoma. He's going to visit Oklahoma at the end of the month after he visits Ohio State for a second time.
Well, let's not forget, Oklahoma has 2 top running backs in the 22 class already.
Right, and they also have, they're also talking Richard Young and Trey Webb are in conversation with Brandon Ennis, the number 1 ranked receiver in the country from Florida as well. I don't know. I just don't know that if your idea of being a priority is being told we need you to commit right now, then I guess
Ohio State doesn't want to be a priority.
I guess then then it is what it is. But I think that it's a situation where Ohio State clearly has any good program has a pecking list of okay, this is this is what we prefer to happen. But knowing that Ohio State wants 2 running backs in that class, it seems like it should have been a situation where some patience was exercised by Trey Webb. But maybe it's just a kid that just didn't want to wait. I mean, he had been committed previously to Georgia. He may just not want to deal with this process. And if that's the case, again, totally fine. But I think that it's a situation of just sort of different priorities, but not necessarily being a priority or not. Does that? You know what I mean? The different priorities for him. That's what he wanted. That's what he wanted to get out of the way. I just don't think Ohio State was in a hurry to do that with anyone.
I don't think Ohio State's in a hurry to do that with anybody who has only played 2 years of high school football, and one of them was a COVID year.
Yeah.
I mean, Ohio State's not going to do that.
Yeah.
It's too big of a program to take, to rush kids that have only played really 1 full year of high school football into a decision. And so if that makes them not showing that he's a priority, then I guess they'll just find a new running back.
Because to be perfectly clear, if Trey Webb would have tried to commit to Ohio State on Saturday, they would have welcomed him with open arms and said, yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Because the conversation has been from the start with him and Richard Young and Justice Haynes, in Georgia. They want to take potentially 2 running backs in that class, knowing that there's going to be some roster attrition with Mayan Williams of, maybe 1 year left after when they get to that point. You've got Master Teague. You just have to ask yourself exactly how do you get there. But I mean, I don't think that they were in a hurry to get anyone on board yet. Now, would they have said no? Hell no, they wouldn't have said no. They would have said absolutely, you can commit, and then they would have kept recruiting Richard Young and Justice Haynes. Because it's 2021 and having a kid committed for 2 years at this point from Florida is almost impossible to do anyway. So you have to keep your options open. I just don't know. I mean, I think that you look
especially a guy who's already decommitted from one.
Right, exactly. So I don't know. We can continue to parse that out a little bit over the next couple of weeks, but there is going to be a big recruiting week, a day coming up for Ohio State here on July 29th. Richard Young, as I said, will be there. Maybe you do start to see that he's the priority, but he is the number 1 ranked running back in the country. He's everyone's priority. I mean,
absolutely.
Now Oklahoma's going to try to make him a priority. That's just, I don't know if it's just one of these situations where.
But if Oklahoma makes him a priority, does Trey Webb say, "Well, I'm not a priority anymore"?
Right. I mean, this is the game you play, and I just think that's why, as we've talked about before, the best approach for Ohio State is just how brutally honest can we be with these kids? Okay, here's the deal, Trey. This is what we think. We think that you're a really good player. We think Richard's a really good player. We'd like to have you both, but we're not going to ask anyone to hurry up and commit.
I like the word you just used there because I was going to bring this up on the show anyways. We don't talk about a lot of other publications at all.
Yeah.
But I think we would be remiss if we didn't bring up the Athletic has done a state-by-state recruiting roundtable with a bunch of high schools. The one thing that keeps coming up, because Ohio State recruits all of these states.
Yeah.
There's been at least one coach in every story that said Ohio State is honest. Ohio State is honest. And I think we can start to really piece together. We already know the recruiting strategy of Ohio State.
I think that people think that we're blowing smoke when we say that on our shows, but I mean, I only say it because that's what the recruits are telling me.
The high school coaches were very candid and honest from all these states. And the one thing that just continued to come up about Ohio State was Ohio State's coaching staff is just honest. Yep. And if you want in, you want in. If you don't want in, they don't want you. They are honest with everybody. And I think that's something that we can really start to take into as Ohio State starts to build this 23 class. I think the 23 class can be an uphill battle for Ohio State. I think there are a lot of guys, that top 100 is not very heavy of Ohio State friendly areas. I mean, it is heavy with Ohio State unfriendly territory. I think it could be a little more of an uphill battle for Ohio State in this 23 class, but I think that honesty is going to go a lot further than.
But that's why you see the Buckeyes expanding their areas, right? That's why you go out now to the Pacific Northwest and you're recruiting Washington very hard, and you have made really important inroads in the Southwest in Arizona in the last couple of years, and you California. So the Buckeyes are in a position where they can make those sort of things happen. But we'll take a break and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. All right, we are back, and we are in the Lettermen Live here. Lettermen Live Lounge. Lettermen Lounge at Roosters on Old Tangi River Road. But this is Talking Stuff, the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast brought to you by Buyers Auto. That's Spencer Holbrook. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. We're just continuing to shoot the proverbial poop when it comes to talking stuff about Ohio State football. And I like this kind of format, honestly, Spencer, because last week there really was nothing that happened on the Ohio State recruiting trail. There were a couple top 10s that got released, when you're talking about players in the 2023 class. And we're talking about kids from areas that are not necessarily known for being pro-Ohio State, but you look at, there was Mac Markway, a tight end from St. Louis, which obviously is an area Ohio State does pretty well in at DeSmet High School. Luke Haas in Oklahoma, who dropped his top 8, and Ohio State was in there with the expectations of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State being the real fighters there. And then you talk about Kayan Lee, the defensive back from Cedar Grove down there in Ellenwood, Georgia, a school Ohio State recruits very regularly. I think they're going to miss out on Christian Miller from that school, but obviously that's where Antoine Jackson's from. A.J. Harris dropped a top 13 or something last weekend. I don't like to put a whole lot of credence into talking about top 13 lists or top 10 lists even, because I think in most of these cases it's kind of just fluff, and I think that most of these kids really have an idea. Even the kids in the 23 class already know it's like a top 3 or 4 in most cases, and there's 5 or 6 schools that are just added to make the graphic look cooler or something. I
agree.
But, obviously Georgia has always been an important area for Ohio State to recruit. But as you said, with the top 100 in the class of 2023 not really being Midwest heavy, it's not really the Ohio State footprint, right? I mean, the Buckeyes are going to need to go back down into SEC country, continue to work out west and in Texas, and it is going to get harder. So that's why I think it's so vital for Ohio State that somebody in that 23 class step up.
Is from the South.
And step up and is a leader from that area, because you're going to need a Pied Piper in that region to kind of convince other kids that it's worth leaving. And I think that in Georgia, there's 4 kids in Georgia, I think, for the class of 2023 that Ohio State is in a really good spot for right now. Again, A.J. Harris and Kayan Lee at the top of that list. Gabriel Harris, the defensive end from the Florida-Georgia line, who decommitted from Florida State the day after visiting Ohio State. Oh, boy, who's the other one I was just thinking of?
This is great audio, bro.
Man.
Anyways,
no, my brain just completely crapped on me.
Well, you keep thinking about that, but here's the thing: Ohio State knows what needs to happen in Georgia, and Ohio State has been hitting Georgia hard.
Always.
You always see them go down there and try to get guys, but here, just in the last couple cycles especially, you look at the kind of guys they're trying to pull out of Georgia. We talked about demographics, and I think demographics are way more important to recruiting than people realize, but Georgia is becoming a more populated state, and it's becoming it's always been a talent-rich area, but it's becoming the talent-rich area. And I think Ohio State recognized that early and started to make some ground up in that state in the last 4 or 5 years. And now is the push to really get some guys from down in there to decide, hey, Ohio State might be the move.
No, so Justice Sainz is the other one I was talking about. We literally were just talking about him when we were talking about running backs. But Justice Sainz is a kid who is going to have Ohio State in that top 2 or 3 along with Georgia and Clemson. But if you're going to go down there with A.J. Harris, it's Clemson, Notre Dame, Georgia. With Kyan Lee, it's going to be Georgia and Clemson and Notre Dame. All these schools are going to be fighting for the same kids. And if you want to be at that top of the list, if you want to be the creme de la creme, that's French for all of you people out there. It means the cream of the cream.
Like the best cream out of all the creams.
The creamiest.
If you want to be the creamiest college football team, you've got to go to Georgia.
If you want to be the cherry on top of the creme de la creme on the gravy, you're going to have to go win these battles. And so for Ohio State, Georgia is very important, always has been. Texas has obviously been a huge part of what they do in the last couple of years. But, again, if you look at that top 100, you're going to have to go to these areas and win, and not just win these battles in areas that have been depleted. Texas has been easy to recruit in the last handful of years because Texas A&M hasn't always been like a real threat. Texas has not been existent at all as a threat. Now they're going to try to make things a little harder. Texas A&M with the name, image, and likeness and being part of the SEC, like they're going to make things more difficult.
North Carolina's recruiting well. Georgia's recruiting well. Texas A&M and Texas are back to recruiting well. Arizona State recruits well. We got to see how that goes. USC's starting to recruit better again. Washington seems like it's getting some momentum. Oregon's
dominating in the West Coast.
Look, all of the areas right now that Ohio State has kind of picked on in the past, they're all coming back. Where do you go to find that talent now? Because all the talent is still in those areas. It just got a lot harder to recruit. And I'm going to keep saying it. Seriously, that 2023 class, it's going to be an uphill battle for Ohio State.
You heard it here first, folks. Spencer Holbrook says Ohio State will have the worst recruiting class in the Big Ten.
No. I think Ohio State will still finish with the top class.
This is Spencer's last episode of Talking Stuff.
Ohio State is just going to have a tougher time picking on the places that it's always picked on. Ohio State has been able to go to North Carolina or Texas and pluck guys out that we want this guy, we're getting this guy. I don't see that happening in this 2023 class as easily as it has happened in the past.
Put it on the record, Spencer. Where do the Buckeyes finish in the 2023 class? Understanding that they don't have a commitment yet in the class, which is just despicable. Shouldn't Ryan Day quit?
Number 4
in the nation.
In the country. It'll be Alabama, Texas A&M, and let's go with like an LSU.
I actually don't entirely think that your premise is wrong. I think that it is going to be harder to recruit in that class. But if you look back historically at Ohio State's recruiting classes, they're not to expect them to finish number 1 or 2 in the country is a little bit wrong.
But that's the point I'm making, is that it's not going to be like Ohio State's recruiting class is going to drop off. I just think
everyone else is getting better.
Everyone else is getting better. Ohio State also is getting better.
A rising tide lifts all boats.
The 21 class is the best class Ohio State's ever had, and the 22 class is going to surpass that. What I'm saying is, it's going to be more difficult for Ohio State to get there. Will they still get there? I think so.
I think that's why it's so important for Ohio State that their brand is at an all-time high right now, because you're going into these other areas and all you're doing is plucking the best of the best. And it's not like you're going down there and getting average Joe, right? So if you're going down to Georgia, you're picking kids that you know in advance are willing to leave that area, and it's pretty easy to tell. I mean, it's not like it's rocket surgery here, okay?
Rocket appliances.
It's not rocket surgery. What? And so, you can't be down there and recruiting just everyone, thinking, well, let's see. You can't take a shotgun approach, because you're wasting your time in a lot of instances. It's really about getting to know these kids ahead of time and making sure that they're the type of kid who's from a family that has ties to the Midwest or has a desire to leave the area, because those are the types of players that are excelling at Ohio State anyway. But I don't know. We got a lot of stuff we could talk about, but I think we should stop talking stuff right now.
Listen, when we first started this, I said, Berm, what are we talking about today? And he said, I don't know. So hopefully that was like fun. I mean,
there's so many things to talk about in the big picture of recruiting that maybe you guys aren't here for. So I guess you'll tell us if this sucked or not. But as the Buckeyes, Ohio State staff is still on vacation. Big Ten Media Day starts this week. Next week is the final week of the recruiting contact period of the summer. It's going to be a 1-week thing. You're going to see, as I said earlier, a big day at Ohio State on July 29th, the barbecue cookout, whatever.
We have an attendance list so far.
I mean, I've talked a little bit about it, but it's certainly growing. You look at it, Peyton Kirkland, the big offensive lineman from Florida, is coming up with Richard Young, and Derek LeBlanc, another defensive end from Florida, who now make his 3rd visit to Columbus.
Who was really impressed by Larry Johnson.
Right, so 3 visits to Ohio State this summer for Derek LeBlanc seems noteworthy to me, I guess, especially if you're talking about Ohio State in the class of 2023, knowing that Ohio's premier defensive end is already committed and off the board to Notre Dame. So you really need to make a splash at that position. And again, I think that we're going to see a real focus for Ohio State on the Southeast in that class. I think you're going to see if you can get a leader to emerge from that group down in that area, whether it's LeBlanc, whether it's AJ Harris, somebody that is close with a lot of these kids down there and will sort of spearhead the effort to get a lot of dudes out of that area. I mean, I don't think it's going to be a huge class. You're maybe a 2022 type class, probably not a 27 like 2022 could be. Well, I just said a lot of numbers.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's going to look more like the 2020 class or 2019 class than it is going to look like.
Yeah, I don't think, and Ohio State's still trying to figure out exactly how the numbers work with super seniors and all this other stuff from COVID. So I don't think that they're in any sort of hurry to kickstart that 23 class, but they definitely need a guy to be a leader in that class and step up. And, right now you're seeing it. Notre Dame's got their first couple commits. Oklahoma just got their first 2. Penn State has a couple, or they had a couple and they decommitted. I don't know. You never know. You can never tell with them.
Penn State's weird.
But it's coming. Florida State, Alabama, all these schools are starting to load up. LSU, I think, has 4 commitments already in that class. Like, there's obviously a natural delay because of COVID, but eventually that has to stop. And Ohio State's going to need someone, whether that's Sonny Styles in the state of Ohio or Josh Padilla or Luke Montgomery. But then you kind of need to approach it from a 2-pronged way. Like, you got to have your Ohio front and you need to have your Southern front. And I think it's just going to be a really interesting conversation to see which front develops first. Yep. I don't know. That's it for me. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. That's Spencer Holbrook. This has been Talking Stuff, the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast, brought to you by Byers Automotive. If you're looking for an auto, go to buyersauto.com. If you're looking for stuff, come here. Thanks.